Hello, we are back. Corey Hughes' Bloody History. We're going to continue on with this George de Mohrenschildt manuscript again. I thought we'd be almost finished with it, but it's looking like we're going to have probably today and 2 more days. So we'll do this today, and then tomorrow I'll have something to break it up a little bit, do something different, and then we'll come back for the last 2 parts. I think it's very important to get this done. And for those of you who've mentioned that I should, in fact, have this printed, it's already been done. So someone's already taken that opportunity, and they amended it with a bunch of other George de Mohrenschildt stuff and called it a book. So that's not going to be happening. But there's plenty of other texts out there that we can find to perhaps one day publish ourselves. A lot of this stuff is not, it's not owned by anybody. If you have someone's courtroom testimony, that is not copyrighted. That can be published with some commentary under fair use. So one day I'll do something like that, perhaps. But I'm getting ready to start writing again very soon. I'm formulating in my mind like what's going to come first, and I'm pretty sure I've got it worked out, I think, but I'm gonna have to see. So we're just going to pick up from where we left off. Our return to the United States. The incident with the stolen maps destroyed my desire to continue working for the Haitian government, and the American ambassador declared in a hysterical way, "I hate you. You cause me nothing but trouble." "I'm a Christian, Mr. Timmons. I don't hate anybody, but I wish you would help me to recover my maps." Before this incident, the Haitian government insisted that I try to develop some of the resources I'd discovered in Haiti. Copper, titanium, bauxite, excellent oil possibilities. Therefore, whenever I left the country, I took the bulk of information, not all, fortunately, with me, and each time I acted as an agent for the government. Here, with my maps gone, the trust was destroyed, and I began preparing for departure. Since the Haitians owed me a large amount of money for the survey, I was able to dispatch most of my valuable information through friends to a safe place to the United States. Anyway, most of my work was completed, and I began worrying that the Haitians would detain me as a hostage. Just recently, an American citizen, an ex-Air Force officer domiciled in Haiti, was accused by Papa Doc of dealing with his enemies abroad. The poor fellow looked for asylum in our embassy, but it was refused to him. All other embassies do give asylum to political refugees. Ours doesn't. In addition to this, the chief of police came and assured the ambassador that nothing would happen to the poor ex-U.S. officer. And so he was carried out screaming and shouting, and nothing was heard of him again. My friends in the know told me that he was beaten to death in the dungeons of the presidential palace. Such a fate was not to our taste. Since nobody expected our immediate departure, we made a very secret deal with a small German line, plying the trade in the Caribbean islands using the good offices of the German ambassador, and the little ship accepted us on board late in the evening. How we avoided the customs, etc., I still had a laissez-passer from the President Duvalier, and nobody bothered to stop our truck with our furniture and supplies and our personal car. Late in the evening, the only person who came to say goodbye to us was the delightful ambassador and his charming Austrian wife. We drank a few glasses of champagne and departed into the dark Caribbean. Incidentally, on the manifest of this ship, we signed our names as follows: Jean, a cook; I, a deckhand. And that's how we landed in Miami, having skirted very close to the Cuban coast. The crew, most international, was composed of a German ex-submarine commander, an engineer, a young Norwegian genius who could repair anything on board, and a medley of Haitians, Jamaicans, Trinidadians, and other picturesque Caribbeans. Since Jean decided to cook some delicious European meals for the captain and the crew, and I, in excess of energy, painted the whole deck, a pleasant surprise awaited us in Miami. When I asked the captain for the bill, not only for us, but for also the car and the luggage, the answer was, "It was a pleasure having you on board. You earned more than the price of your transportation. The only way to reciprocate was to invite the officers to a suptitious dinner." From Miami, we drove slowly to Texas. Incidentally, as we were skirting late night at Lake Okeechobee on a deserted road, a brilliant comet crossed the dark tropical sky, lighting the weird scenery around us and scaring our dogs. A comet for some is considered a good omen, but for us it foretold very bad times indeed. In Dallas, we hoped to meet some good old friends. Quite a few had come to Haiti and enjoyed our hospitality. Instead, we encountered suspicion and an outright hostility. Surprised at first, we soon discovered the reason, the Warren Committee report. Immediately after our testimonies, the transcripts of which we signed without even bothering to read, it was supposed to be truth and nothing but the truth. Who would want to quibble over the words? After our depositions, we were so sick and tired of the whole affair, we put the matter of the inquiries by these various agencies and even our own testimonies completely out of our minds. And while driving an open car back to Dallas along the coast, we breathed in the fresh marine air and wanted to forget the whole tragic incident. But in Dallas, we had to face another situation. Have you read the Warren report? A lawyer, a good friend of ours, asked us. No, I answered. I heard there is a comprehensive resume of various depositions. Aren't you going to read it? It contains some 16 volumes, and one of them is almost exclusively about the two of you. The something of suspicion, of innuendos, of gossip, of semi-lies and concealment polluted the air around us, but the events forced us to read what we had said in Washington, D.C., and especially what has been said about us in these 16 volumes. Still, we postponed reading these dry, bureaucratic, insipid pages until one day we sat with some friends in Fort Worth. They had known Lee and Marina also, but had avoided interrogation by some hook and crook, and they loaned to us the volume in which we figured so prominently. Read it carefully and don't miss a word. Actually, you should read all the volumes, and you will understand the attitude of many people towards you. And indeed, after reading several depositions, I was ready to vomit, and I understood what Albert Jenner, our inquisitor, and the Warren Committee had mentioned. You will be the only people in the world to know exactly what others think about you. He did not dwell further on these words and did not indicate that our depositions and those of other people we knew or had even remote relations would be printed after careful editing to probe the nebulous point that Lee was the sole assassin. It turned out that some decent people volunteered to testify on the condition that their testimonies would remain secret and available only to Warren Committee members, but FBI insisted that all depositions should be printed and distributed to the public. The shades of J. Edgar Hoover must regret that decision after it was discovered how many falsehoods his organization was involved in. And never again these patriotic and decent people will expose themselves in the degrading positions of informers. It was saddening to read the opinion of an old business associate that he never trusted me completely. My ex-secretary divulged that I had made many suspicious and intriguing trips to Houston, Texas. Such an exotic and mysterious place to her underling's mind. A scurrilous remark was made by an old Russian emigre, a biddy whom we never considered bright but harmless. That Chinese woman never even believed in God, she declared indignantly, as if religion was not a very personal matter. He always wanted to be the commissar of Texas, was an opinion of a slight acquaintance. And finally, the testimony of my ex-son-in-law, Gary Taylor. If anyone had finagled this assassin or had influenced Lee Harvey Oswald in that direction, that person would obviously be George de Mohrenschildt. Of course, in the meantime, my daughter had abandoned him, and he kept a grudge against me because I had not approved of their teenage marriage. Reading all this, I even thought of writing a short book assembling these opinions and give the book the title, I Arranged Kennedy's Assassination, or another title that would attract customers. My affair with the teenage Jacqueline Bouvier and how I got rid of her husband. The same people, Russian refugees and Americans who had detested or ignored Lee and Marina, made money off of them later, especially out of the resulting unbelievable promotion of the poor Russian Marina, that defenseless, God-fearing, miserable wife of that brutal monster, Lee Harvey Oswald. The story reminds me somewhat of another specimen, Svetlana Stalina, the daughter of the greatest assassin in the world, including Adolf Hitler and Attila the Hun, communist and daughter of the ferocious communist who came to the United States in search of God. But back to Marina. She finally made it to the United States, just like her girlfriend put it in her letter from Soviet Russia in 1962. She became a success, had her cover in time, money poured from the naive Americans. Her arrival in this country was superbly fulfilled. Lee Harvey Oswald had finally become a real moneymaker after his death. Poor fellow, even his tomb was stolen and desecrated from the public cemetery near Arlington, Texas. Lee became subject of articles and books, and will be for a long time by the scavengers from a poor man's death. I would not dare to call our dear President Gerald Ford a scavenger, but his book was the first one, directly accusing Lee Harvey Oswald on his Portrait of the Assassin. Naturally, the book was ghostwritten, inept, and uninteresting, yet he was the first one, he or his ghostwriter, to have information assembled by the Warren Committee. Again, I have to give credit to the American people. The book was a failure. Newspapermen kept calling on us. They were geniuses at discovering our whereabouts. We did not have a listed number and stayed with some friends. They should have used their talents investigating Lee's activities in Atlanta, New Orleans, and Mexico City just before the assassination. I don't know of any activities of Oswald in Atlanta. And he certainly was not in Mexico City. Garrison did it, and his career as district attorney was ruined. People who had the slightest connection with Lee, and those testimonies were not exactly kosher as far as the official version was concerned, died mysteriously. The owner of the apartment house on Gillespie, an eccentric lady who, like us, was extremely fond of Haiti. She almost had a fit when she saw Haitian car licenses on our car, asked discreetly for police protection for us. With the exception of the European press, the majority of the American books and articles accepted an almost preposterous thesis introduced by some lawyer of the Warren Committee that the same bullet killed Kennedy and gravely wounded Governor Connally. Yet Connally himself distinctly remembers 2 consecutive shots, and he never changed his testimony. Only some more logical and cynical writers mention the fact that there was no reason whatsoever in Lee's actions, but they approved the thesis that Lee was aiming at Governor Connally, whom he had reason to dislike. But being a usual flip-flop, he killed Kennedy instead of only wounding Connally. Notwithstanding these superficial conclusions favored in USA, the general opinion in other countries stopped accepting the thesis of Lee's guilt. Many people suspected LBJ as a party which profited directly from the assassination and who always thoroughly disliked JFK and the whole Kennedy clan, who used to cold shoulder him and his wife. It's not for us to judge, but the latest discoveries of FBI's finagling and some credence to this theory. After all, LBJ was a most devious man, and jointly with it, his ignorance was also out of the ordinary. They say he was not sure of the location of Vietnam. And so here again, Lee Harvey Oswald was the most convenient patsy. And so little by little, even naive and credulous Americans, annoyed by this constant harping on Lee's guilt, by the serving of platitudes and repetitious statements, began to disbelieve in Lee's guilt, or at least had begun to doubt the non-existence of any conspiracy. After all, Americans are business-minded. If somebody performs an act as assassination without any rhyme or reason and without any financial reward, something stinks in Denmark. We personally retained our doubts to ourselves, saw fewer people than before, restrained our social life, and eliminated false friends and acquaintances. A dear friend of ours, staff writer for the Dallas Herald, insisted on interviewing us and pointed out my deeply felt opinion how harmful it is for the United States to believe that a lone lunatic killed the president and then another lunatic killed him. And then shortly afterwards, the brother of the president was murdered in cold blood by another lunatic without any apparent reason. What is it for a country of homicidal maniacs? Had a reasonable theory of a plot or plots been substantiated, I think it would be beneficial to this country. A message from Lee. In February of 1967, we finally found a suitable place to settle down. Before that, we moved from one place to another and visited our children in California and Mexico. The place conveniently called La Citadelle was exactly fitting to us and was ample enough to accommodate all the furniture which had been stored in the warehouse since the beginning of 1963. It was about time to settle, as 4 years' storage and the southwestern warehouses began to exhaust us financially. I thought of abandoning the whole junk and leave it to the warehouse. It is good sometimes to start anew, but there were books. And so we went to the warehouse with an old faithful friend always ready to help and to pick up some old junk for himself. And before our furniture was taken out, we began looking through the accumulation of various and sundry items that could be eliminated. I was less than interested in this task, so I chatted with my friend, a good guy who had followed us on so many of our trips, while Jean was finishing the selection of things and take to discard. Suddenly, he rushed out of the warehouse with a crazy... Suddenly, she rushed out of the warehouse with a crazy look on her face, shouting excitedly, "Look what I found!" She dragged me to the pile of open crates, and I saw inside a slightly familiar-looking green box. "What the hell is this?" "This is the box with the records I gave Marina before our departure," she shouted. "How did they get here? We left them such a long time ago. I haven't the slightest idea. I considered them lost." Jean was short of words. This was so weird. I had used them myself to learn English when I came to this country. They served me well. Then I loaned them to Marina long before our departure for Haiti. "Remember how punctiliously honest Lee was," I said. He would not keep any of our belongings, but how the hell did they get into this warehouse? Possibly he remembered where we were storing our furniture, or maybe he gave the package to Glover, whom he had loaned some of our furniture, and whom finally added it to the rest of the stored boxes at the Southwest warehouse. This remains a mystery to this day, because we lost track of Glover, a good guy who got so frightened of his very slight acquaintanceship with the president's assassin that he moved out somewhere without leaving an address. My wife began taking the albums out of the box as she opened to see if the records were not broken. She shrieked almost hysterically. "Look, there is a picture of Lee Oswald here." This was the same so controversial picture of Lee which appeared on the cover of the defunct Life. Many newspapermen and investigators had assumed and had written hundreds of pages that this picture was a fabrication, a fake, a superimposed photograph. Frankly, we did not care, but now, right there, was a proof that the picture was a genuine. We stood literally frozen stiff, Lee staring at us in his martial pose, the famous rifle in his hands, like in a Marine parade. It was a gift for us from beyond the grave. Okay. Let us just pause here for one moment. This picture we'll do a show on the backyard photographs one day, because it clearly was not Oswald. It was clearly Carrie Thornley. The face was clearly superimposed. It was definitely, and then the picture was found where 3 times, right? It was found in the Payne's house amongst Lee's property, right? Where else was it found? Here, George de Mohrenschildt had one. And remember, the Dallas police, they had a picture from Ruth Payne's place on November 22nd, right? It didn't take them fucking 10 minutes to find that shit, right? So they find that and the rifle and all that stuff and everything incriminating, possibly in the handgun, the whole 9 yards, all wrapped up within just like 3 or 4 hours. So de Mohrenschildt is claiming that there were these records, I'm assuming audio records to learn English. These were lent to Marina. And that was the last time they saw them. Then, years later, as they're unpacking their stuff, they happen to find the records, returned from whom, nobody knows. And in there happens to be a backyard photograph also. And he's saying here that this is proof that it's genuine. Are you fucking kidding me? George de Mohrenschildt is in on this. This heartfelt fucking manuscript is nothing more than his own personal alibi. So much of it is just wrong and false. We stood literally frozen stiffly, staring at us in his martial pose, the famous rifle in his hands, like in a Marine parade. It was a gift for us from beyond the grave. What did he mean by leaving this picture to us? I wondered aloud. He was not a vain kind of person. Then Jean shouted excitedly again. Look, there is an inscription here. It read, "To my dear friend George from Lee." And the date follows April 1963. At the time, when we were thousands of miles away in Haiti, I kept looking at the picture, and the inscription deeply moved my thoughts, going back to when Lee was alive. All right. So that's George de Mohrenschildt's story, which he can't take back. To my dear friend George from Lee, it doesn't say anything about Hunter or fascists or any of that, right? He doesn't mention that at all. But he should be, right? Shouldn't he? Shouldn't he? Then I slowly turned the photograph over, and there was another epitaph seemingly in Marina's handwriting in Russian. In translation, it reads, "This is the Hunter of fascists, ha ha ha." Ah! It was Marina's handwriting, and it was in Russian. That clarifies a lot. That obviously was not from Oswald. It was obviously, if this is true at all, if it is true that this was inserted into the records and returned without their knowledge, somehow, just snuck into their fucking house, if that's true, then Marina obviously put it there. Here Marina was again making fun of her husband, jeering Lee's very serious anti-fascist feelings. I don't think that's what she's laughing at, which we knew so well and described in several chapters of this book. It's hard to describe the impact of this discovery on us, especially Lee's dedication and Marina's inscription. This message from beyond the grave was amazing and shocking. From the grave we did not even dare to visit because FBI considered with suspicion all the visitors at Lee's burial place. The confirmation that Lee considered me his best friend flattered me, but Marina's message expressed a chilling scorn for her husband. Anyway, if he were a hunter of fascists and we agree with such a description, why was she making fun of him? First of all, it makes in doubt her assertion that Lee tried to shoot General Walker. Secondly, for a Soviet-Russian refugee, the word fascist is not a laughing matter. Some 15 million people lost their lives fighting them, and how many more died of cold and hunger? We kept this photograph for ourselves and showed it only to a few close friends. Their reactions were interesting. To some, the photograph indicated that Lee was a maniac, a killer. It constituted proof of his aggressiveness, of his guilt. To others, just the opposite. It gave him the aura of a militant idealist. The man of such anti-fascist inclinations could not be the assassin of most liberal, race-conscious president in the history of the United States. We did not show the photograph to any authorities. To them, Lee Harvey Oswald's case was closed, and we did not want any further involvements. Neither did we show it to any investigators or reporters in the United States. But I did write a letter to a friend, one of the editors of Life magazine, who's run by the CIA, again, explaining that I had a message from Lee Harvey Oswald, and I did ask him to keep the matter confidential. I added to my letter a short resume of the facts, how this picture got into our possession. Immediately, I received a call from my friend saying that Life had a team working on Oswald's case, a team of investigators, because the magazine had doubts of the Warren Committee's conclusions. The next day, a reporter assigned to the assassination case called me, and we talked for a long time. He was intimately familiar with all the details, psychological and technical, of this unbelievable complex case. Having worked on it since November 1963, like ourselves, he was at Marina's inscription and gave it the same meaning as ourselves. We shall use to as main feature of our special edition if and when we know something definite about Oswald's involvement or of his innocence, he said. Again, I asked the man to keep this matter confidential temporarily, and he promised to do so. Obviously, either Life's people were talkative, or more probable, our telephone was tapped. This we found at several occasions. We know now that more about Watergate-type tactics of our government agencies, especially FBI. But at the time, we did not have anything to conceal except the existence of this picture, and this only for our own sentimental reasons. Whenever we heard a suspicious noise on the telephone, we laughed, spoke in a foreign language, or made offensive remarks at whoever was listening in. Some voluminous files must be hidden somewhere containing transcripts, translations, and obliterations of our conversations. Again, being faithful taxpayers for years and years, we could but marvel at the unbelievable waste of our money. But what was it compared to 140 billion US dollars spent in Vietnam? But one bad habit leads to another. Now something should be said as to why we did not contact Marina regarding picture. Naturally, she knew of its existence from our mutual friends, the Fords. But as this story clearly indicates, there is no love lost between Marina and us. We had helped her with the baby care, with her own health, and finally made a supreme effort trying to solve her unsolvable conflict with Lee. We never received a word of thanks from her. But this is not important. We helped her when she was poor and desperate. Unfortunately, after Lee's death, she showed herself as a real operator. She created an appearance of a helpless victim, of a woman searching for God, but naturally God-fearing Americans sent her substantial contributions or donations, all tax-free. We heard from some reporters that donations were sent frequently, stuck between the pages of Bibles, and she would grab the money and flung the Bible furiously on the floor. We did not treat her very nicely in our testimonies, but we were utterly truthful. Marina should have recognized it. She had taken the trouble of reading our depositions. She might have come then to a true evaluation of herself and of her dead husband. Well, she is settled now. When we see each other, we say hello politely. As a matter of fact, the last time I even did not recognize her. She looked prosperous and well and spoke excellent English. Another reason we did not contact Marina and haven't had a serious conversation with her was her attitude towards Mrs. Ruth Payne. Ruth was a perfectly charming, charitable Quaker, a Christian in the true sense of the word, who, like us, helped the Oswalds out of pure humanitarian impulses. Actually, she did more for them than anyone else. Marina lived with her from on and off, took advantage of her hospitality. Ruth drove her to New Orleans and back. She showed utter kindness to her, occasionally Lee, and especially to baby June. She and her husband were simply admirable people, yet Ruth had her own family to take care of. As well as her teaching profession, her only reward consisted of lessons in conversational Russian. Lee, on the other hand, seldom accepted hospitality and certainly did not ask for it, and yet Ruth's and Marina's great friendship ended abruptly after the assassination. As Ruth told us later upon our return from Haiti, Marina said that she did not want to see her ever again, and Mrs. Payne was too proud of a person to insist. It is possible that Marina was advised by the authorities to shy away from her former independent-minded friends and that she must have been scared stiff of authorities. Time will tell. But still, many years went by, and she still does not see Mrs. Ruth Payne. Short sketches of various incidents involving Marina will prove to the reader these peculiarities of her character, which may incidentally appear admirable to many readers. Her dreams of America, bristling with high buildings, crisscrossed with high-speed roads, blessed with luxury for everyone, and especially with fast automobiles for all teenagers and adults. And she was right. Some economists calculated 15 years ago that if the automobiles kept on proliferating at the same rate, each family in America would possess 500 automobiles at the end of this century, a paradise on earth. Yet we never disliked Marina. There was really nothing to dislike. There was no substance in her. She was amusing sometimes, witty, naive mostly, like some Russian peasants, yet with a great deal of shrewdness underneath. My wife used to call her affectionately that rascal Marina, and that description fitted her perfectly. Next chapter, Unusual Visitors. The photograph we found in the record album is identical to the one Life magazine published shortly after the assassination. I think Marina took it, at least she so testified. Only the dedication to me and the inscription by Marina constitute new elements. This picture unquestionably did a lot of damage to Lee. It showed him in a militaristic pose, holding a rifle, a pistol on his side. But let's not forget that Lee was trained by the Marine Corps to hold, show, and respect weapons. The Beretta we saw in his apartment was well oiled and immaculately clean. Another bow to the United States Marine Corps. But whatever later testimony tried to prove, I knew that he was not a particularly good shot. He did not have that cold stare in his eyes. Incidentally, he had rather attractive gray eyes. He did not have a very steady hand and a stiff stance, which indicate to anyone familiar with things militarily a good marksman. To Jean and I, he did not have an ugly expression of a killer, and we know professional killers. Jean in China during the Japanese occupation, I in other parts of the world. He owned a pistol, but we never discussed why. I assumed for self-defense. He lived in a very disreputable part of Dallas. All right, so here we go again. George de Mohrenschildt saying that he knows that Oswald had a pistol. How does he know Oswald had a pistol? So he didn't see Oswald again after Oswald moved back to New Orleans in April of 1963, and they went to Haiti, and Oswald allegedly got the revolver just a matter of weeks before that, right? And it was rejected by the post office in Dallas, and it made its way to Seaport Traders, where it was being held. And the gun that was sent to him was a 1999 valued Smith & Wesson, or $29.99 valued, but he had a $10 coupon, allegedly, right? So we got it for $19.99. But he didn't send $19.99. He sent $14.99 for a cheaper generic pistol, and they sent him that by mistake or instead, but without asking for any additional money, or the money was supposed to be paid different at Seaport Traders, right? But then Oswald never picked it up. The person who picked up the handgun from Seaport Traders signed for it Paxton. And Paxton is a real person. It's probably an alias, but I found another reference to Paxton in some New Orleans CIA documents. Not coincidence. Okay, so Oswald didn't pick that up. Some CIA agent named Paxton picked it up. So fuck you, George de Mohrenschildt. And would he have known about that within the 2 weeks of Oswald getting it and them leaving in April, or maybe 3 weeks? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Maybe Lee liked to shoot at the leaves, but he did not have a decisive, self-assured, automatic attitude of a sharpshooter. On the contrary, he was nervous, jittery, poorly coordinated type, and, as I said before, completely unathletic. Also devoid of any mechanical ability. I had observed boys and men of that type in my own regiment, and they were totally unfit for military performance, and usually very poor shots. We had tried to keep the existence of Lee's photograph as secret as possible. Just a few friends saw it, and Life's reporter knew of it. Something, however, leaked out, and about 2 weeks after my conversation with Life's writers, I received a strange telephone call. A slightly accented voice said, and I quote, "We are from Life magazine," and he mentioned the name of the reporter I had spoken to. "We are here in Dallas and would like to see you." "Certainly," I agreed immediately. "Come over." They knew the address, and an hour later, 2 men appeared at our house, a strange pair. One slight, Latin American-type fellow, the other a big bruiser, beefy, powerful, Anglo type. They sat down and announced they had represented Life magazine. The Latin mentioned his repertorial qualifications. The beefy character said he was a photographer. Indeed, he was loaded with cameras of all types. The names were respective, Smith and Fernandez. Smith mentioned also that he was a staff photographer for Fortune magazine, which put me completely at ease. All right, let's see if we can't find all the information on Smith and Fernandez, who were allegedly reporters with Fortune magazine and Life magazine in whatever fucking year this was. 70s. It had to have been in the 70s. "We would like to ask you a few questions the other Life reporter failed to discuss with you," said Fernandez. I obliged him. These questions were unimportant, mostly about Lee's habits and his character. Then they became more specific. Was he sociable? Whom did he know well? What were his relations with fellow workers in this country and in the USSR? Did he have many friends in addition to us? What did he do in Mexico? Whom did he meet there? Could he speak Spanish? Why did he go to New Orleans? Could he drive a car? And many other questions, which I do not recall now. I answered these questions to the best of my ability, but naturally many had to remain unanswered, since I was out of the country and did not have any contacts with Lee during that time. The question may arise, why was I so frank with Life magazine people and let myself pumped out so naively? The answer is that one of my most admired friends used to be a staff writer for Life, and he had performed an extremely kind and difficult intervention on behalf of my father stranded in Europe during the war. Incidentally, I felt very much at ease with these two characters because I had a visitor at the time, an economist from the East, a very athletic fellow and a good friend, and he was there all the time. Later in the afternoon, Jean arrived, very surprised to see the unusual guests. I explained who they were. "But you have a very strong Spanish accent," she said. She asked Fernandez. "Yes, of course, I am of Spanish origin, and I had worked as a reporter for Life mostly in Latin America, so excuse my poor English." This sounded reasonable enough. Then Smith, the photographer, produced a series of excellent, very clear photos of some 20 men, mostly of Latin appearance, and asked pointedly if we had ever met any of them. We both looked carefully at these strange, sometimes brutal faces. "I'm not sorry not to have met any of them," I quipped. "They look rather disreputable. Who are they?" Somehow this question remained unanswered. "I have an excellent memory for faces, and I am positive not to ever have seen any of them," I added. Jean, in a more cheerful and confident mood, pointed out 3 better-looking ones. "This one has a cute mustache. That one has an interesting look about him. And this one is so handsome. Oh, I would like to meet these 3 men," she concluded laughingly. This cheerfulness was met by stony silence, a kind of hostile attitude. Fernandez did not say a word. He seemed disappointed. Smith broke the awkward silence and asked me I'd take a few pictures of you and the dogs. Mentioning of the dogs conquered Jean, and we obliged again. many photographs were taken. The conversation lingered for a while longer. Fernandez became more amiable and called our dog Nero in the Spanish manner, Senor Neron, which pleased Jean to no end. Finally, the two strangers left, promising to contact us again from New York to give our regards to my friend there and to send us a couple copies of the pictures. A few days went by. We both were busy and didn't have time or occasion to discuss the visit. One evening, lying in bed, I asked Jean, what did you think of those two characters who came to visit us the other day? Rather suspicious, she said. I was thinking of them at this very moment. This is ESP. How did you know they were from Life, she asked. Did they have any identification? None, I mused, and I did not ask for any, but they knew exactly what I was talking about with the Life reporter in New York. Fernandez remembered all the questions, all my answers. They were very careless, said Jean convincingly. Don't you know that the house had been bugged on and off, more on than off? She was absolutely right. These men were imposters. Next day, I checked with the Life offices in New York. Smith and Fernandez did not exist as far as Life was concerned. But it is very possible that my naivete and the very certainty that we did not know any of the men in the photographs put these two men at ease. Otherwise, we might have joined the other 20 or 30 people who had died mysteriously just because of their accidental knowledge of some details or people which might have affected the official version of Oswald's guilt. We never communicated to anyone except to a few very selected and faithful friends what had occurred. The government agencies would have made a usual mess of the situation, and we might have become victims of an eventual revenge. But to our minds, this visit was a very significant. People at whom we glanced so casually were unquestionably involved in some way in President Kennedy's assassination. Now they have disappeared, swallowed in the mass of our population, or possibly they had left the country altogether. It is a mystery to solve, but not for clods from our bureaucratic mass of officials, unsophisticated, undereducated, and like the Englishman said during the War of our GIs, overpaid, overfed, oversexed, over here. And Lee's opinion comes clear to mind. The bureaucrats all over the world are the same. And I am adding my own definition. Most of them would not be able to make an honest living in the world of business and free competition. Next chapter, who are the real criminals? Over 12 years went by since the tragic events of 1963. So we're in 1975. Kennedy's widow remarried. Questions arose in some decent people's minds. Did Jacqueline know what type of individual she espoused? Was it a huge bank account? Not a real person. The dean of women at the University of Texas, where I had been lecturing at the time, was pale with indignation when she heard the news. When Mrs. Aristotle Onassis became a widow again, and then Robert Kennedy was assassinated, carrying with him the reason for the strange warnings he had given my friend Willem Oltmans. Worst of all, Dr. Martin Luther King was shot in a cowardly way by an ignorant redneck, possibly encouraged by another redneck, but clever and powerful one, J. Edgar Hoover, who hated and despised the blacks. The award of the Nobel Prize for Peace to Reverend King was an ultimate insult to him. Then the shrews and unscrupulous CIA agents and their associates assembled large fortunes by illicit profits in Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. And the discoveries will forthcoming of Deal's corruption, double-crossings discoveries, annoying to me because they have to do with taxes I had been paying for years, and in this manner American money will soon be Chinese money. In a way, the high school dropout, that inferior American Lee Harvey Oswald, had foreseen all that by calling out our bureaucracy stupid but crooked. But knowing him the way I did, he would have also understood Gulag Archipelago and would have approved of Solzhenitsyn's indignation. My wife and I spent many an agonizing moment thinking of Lee, ashamed that we did not stand up more decisively in his defense. But who would have listened to us at the time that would have published anything true and favorable to him? If you, dear reader, are interested not in the assassinations but in organized murder for profit, follow the articles in the French publication Le Canard Enchant. You will learn about Aristotle Onassis' fortune made during the war was based on a very simple formula. Old tankers are overinsured, duly sank by the Nazi submarines. Mostly, ignorant crew members drown and their no less ignorant poor families receive peanuts in a way of compensation. Repeat the operation dozens, maybe hundreds of times. Later, when a huge fortune is made, acquire exclusive rights for transportation of Arab oil. If you believe in just punishment, Aristotle's rotten soul will remain forever in the Greek Orthodox hell. Conscience is the most stretchable substance. Ari's friend found him cheerful, amicable, cosmopolitan, intelligent. Although his education was not more advanced than Lee's, he danced well and sang Greek and Argentinian folklore songs, only his end was somewhat gruesome. Our performance at the Warren Commission was very lukewarm and not decisive enough in favor of Lee. I hope he will forgive us. And I hope also that Mrs. Marguerite Oswald will also forgive us. Lee's innocence, or his being just a patsy, is our conviction, and now we can speak more objectively of the reasons of our conviction. That the young generation in America does not believe in Lee's guilt is a fact by why should old fogies like ourselves have such unorthodox opinions. Let us talk of the clever leading on by the choice lawyers of the Warren Committee, which forced us, Lee's friends and acquaintances, to appear somewhat antagonistic to him. The general opinion set up in the United States at the time puts pressure on you, warps your judgment, changes your words. In these short chapters, we tried to correct the distorted image of this good friend of ours. Some will say that the introduction of the late Aristotle Onassis in these chapters may be in bad taste. Others may find it interesting and significant relevance. Somebody else will prove who fired the fatal shots, will prove or disprove Lee's involvement or lack of it in the conspiracy to commit the assassination. If there are good Catholics involved in this affair, maybe a confession will solve the problem. We like to speak of Lee's occasional clever repartees, of his frequent outbursts of justifiable anger at the existing situation in this rotten world of ours, of his deep concern for the starving and poorer than himself, of his worry and his pity for the racially segregated, for the mass deprived of their just rights by the clever manipulators. Had Lee lived most of his life in the totalitarian country, he would have landed in a concentration camp for his outspoken opinions, for his loose tongue. More should be said of Lee's interest in the world affairs. I can hear his clever speaking voice, sincere, simple, without affection, its attractive modulation. Lee did not have a trace of the nasal, southern drawl. His was a voice of thinking, refined individual. Incidentally, I never heard Lee use any four-letter Anglo-Saxon words, no profane language in English or in Russian. This was most unusual for a man of his background. I mean, New Orleans and Fort Worth slums in the United States Marine Corps. But do not think he was a sissy, as there was a widespread belief that if you do not swear, you are not a red-blooded American. I am guilty of constantly cussing myself, and the students with whom I associate happily these days consider me okay and a good guy. Segregationists are still here, but they are losing ground. Still, we have a long way to go. A professor of medicine from Kentucky, but born in Alabama, believes that intermarriage and any sexual integration is the only way to combat racism. The ones who disagree should be shot, he says. Lee agreed with this opinion, I remember. We wish that our dogs, Nero and Papia, both gone now, could have barked on his behalf. Such a testimony would have been very flattering for Lee, but you cannot fool an animal, says a truism, and yet they were mephiant little creatures and trusted very few. We constantly shout communists at fault. It's Marxist conspiracy, instead that most of our mishaps come from our own mistakes, committed or good actions, omittees, or what this fiendish names were given our friend Lee Harvey Oswald, communist traitor, misfit, insane killer. In the meantime, our top capitalist, Harold Lamar Hunt, called John F. Kennedy a traitor and confronted between the U.S. government and the Soviet Union during the missile crisis a dispute between two communist states. Everything is relative. We waste 140 billions and 45,000 lives, ours or only, to prove that democracy is right, and Lee Harvey Oswald wanted to improve our image around the world in his own way, humanizing the United States. Remember his nice but naive defense of the American ways to his friends' workers during his stay in Minsk. Listening to Lee describe his experience in the Soviet Union, one saw clearly that the Soviet Union was not a utopia, but just another livable country, enormous with endless problems, full of good, friendly people, and many others stupid, cruel, and limited. Judge the man after reading this book. No easy solution is offered, no criminal presented on a dish. I'm not even offering an analysis of his complex personality. Make up your own mind. Why, with passing time, we become more and more convinced that the whole story of Lee Harvey Oswald has not been told. We are adding just another chapter to it. It should be useful, as I have known him well, better than anybody else, according to the Warren Report, better than his mother and wife, according to the lengths of our dispositions. how the oppressive weight influenced my testimony can be so clearly by me now, looking at it after several years as if it were somebody else's deposition, deprived of a warm feeling for Lee, full of my own stupid jokes, which make me sad now. I was not expressing myself, really. I didn't defend Lee vigorously and passionately enough, which I am sure he would have done if he had to defend me in a similar situation. I was cleverly led by the Warren Committee counsel, Albert Jenner, into saying some things I had not really wanted to say, to admit certain defaults in Lee, which I wasn't sure were his. In other words, I consider myself a coward and a slob who did not stand up to defend proudly a dear friend, whatever odds were against him. That big, clever boy, the trial lawyer, handled me like a baby. First he bullied me, then he led me to tell him carefully all about my life by saying, "Don't conceal anything. We know more about yourself than you do." I should have answered, "If you do, why ask the questions? Why all the rigmarole?" And then later, in a friendly manner at this time, Jenner would put up forward some suppositions regarding Lee, suppositions which seemed innocuous enough at the time, but sufficiently cleverly termed that would make me admit that possibly, just possibly, he might have committed a crime. After all, he was so cruel. He put a cigarette on his wife's bare flesh, a torturer. It makes me remember now that Lee was keenly aware of the fact that it was the white man that had brought in scalping during the American Indian War, and later somehow the Indians, cruel and contemptuous, were charged with this unpleasant procedure. Is that true? Let's find out if that's true or not. Almost everyone has a skeleton hidden in a closet. So did I. I shall talk later about it, but it was such an insignificant small skeleton I should have taken a stronger stand. Instead, I talk, drunk with words and descriptions. Talking about oneself, as everyone knows, is the sweetest pastime. And Jenner got me into this talking mood by calling me distinguished, handsome, virile, intimated that I knew people all over the world, that I led a very colorful life, was a great Casanova member of the jet set. He lauded my university degrees. In reality, the bastard despised me, my independence, and especially my liberalism. Jenner was an impressive trial lawyer. Somewhat like Bailey, it was hard to resist him. He knew how to cajole and how to threaten. In reality, Jenner spoke much more than I did, though Warren report, so well doctored, does not show it. At lunchtime and between the sessions, he offered me suggestions, tried to find answers, a clever plan, and a good preparation. It makes me think of the Chukovetsky trial in the Soviet Union. There, of course, drugs were also used. The result on paper were proving General Chukovsky's treason. The results for the Soviet Union was the fall of the Red Army and Nazis' original gigantic success. I'm not comparing myself to that, but rather the whole Warren report and its disastrous effect on the American credibility. In my case, such a long deposition had a sophomoric effect on me. Yet you get deadly tired of these official proceedings. You begin to agree with the questioner just to get out of this boring room, away from this annoying, dry individual. You only dream to get away from all the nonsense, to go back to your sunny house in Haiti, to my few real friends there, to my interesting work, and to the weekends of skin diving in the beautiful transparent waters of the Caribbean near the Arcadian Islands. My idiotic interrogation lasted almost 3 full days, and then the same torture was inflicted on my wife. Somewhat shorter and enhanced by the presence of our Manchesters, Nero and Papia, who testified silently, unfortunately, for their friend Lee. The final conclusion after observation of all this bunch of lawyers is a short pun. "Have you ever met an honest lawyer?" someone asked. "Yes, I did, only recently. He paid for his own lunch." Gene's best suggestion, eliminated from the Warren report, was a suggestion similar to mine. "Don't try to solve the crime of the century," he deposition, i.e. gossip, 90% irrelevant to the issues. "Have good detectives hired. We are supposed to be the heaven of private dicks. Don't use FBI or CIAs or any other federal agents. They are recognizable a mile away." During our walking trip through Guatemala, where we happened to be there just before the Bay of Pigs, the town was full of crew-cut Americans not speaking a word of Spanish, out of place. I told Gene, "But these are Marines, or rather Marine pilots. What the hell are they doing here?" No question the same idea occurred to all the pro-Castro Guatemalans, and the country is full of them, and messages were sent on on time to Fidel Castro. Looking over Marina's deposition recently, I was amazed how closely our opinions on Lee matched. They almost coincided, as if they had been dictated to us. Well, you don't fucking say. The weight of the evidence must have influenced both of us. First, we were both angry at Lee for putting us in such a horrible position. Bad enough for me, but think of Marina's plight, especially the first days after the assassination. I cannot talk of her feelings, but I know how deadly scared she was in a foreign country, not knowing the language, and used to the Stalinist tactics. We know Jenner and Dulles told us that Marina had made innumerable mistakes, perjuries, if you wish, being under tremendous pressure and frightened out of her wits. The pressure we were under was of a different type, yet very strong. We had lived here for a long time, and we were familiar with the American, in quotes, ways. But we cannot forget the attitude of the American embassy in Haiti, the ambassador's animosity towards me, the hard and soft approach of the FBI agent, the possibility of losing my contract in Haiti, the mysterious letter from the American embassy from Washington, this I found through a few remaining friends there, warning the personnel there against us. There was a pressure from our friends by the radio, newspaper, TV. Finally, this powerful Warren Committee, all saying disassociate yourself from this assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. Everybody was on a bandwagon condemning this insignificant ex-Marine. Now let us ask ourselves a question. Was there a conspiracy on the part of the Warren Committee members, this powerful and impressive group of people, to promote a deliberate lie, to inculpate an innocent person? No, I don't think so. They acted naively and sheepishly for a purpose which seems right to them and good for the country. The country was in upheaval. It was necessary to pacify the public opinion. And the dead eccentric is the easiest subject of condemnation. Personally, I think that such a mentality is tragic and detrimental to this country. It is the same self-illusion as throwing Prince Sihanouk out of Cambodia, accusing him of being a red prince, then financing and supporting to the bitter end of his enemies. Fortunately for the red prince, he is, well, back in his country, while his enemies are either dead or exiled. And now I am sorry to cast an accusation at John F. Kennedy's family, especially on his brother Robert, who wanted to sanctify the president's memory and to make us all American citizens, forget our president's biggest mistake, the Bay of Pigs. William Altman's strange incident described here is inexplainable by his attitude. Also, our conversations with Jackie Kennedy's family. The Bay of Pigs resulted in an unbelievable hatred and desires of revenge among Cubans, refugees, groups, as well as among Castro followers, but to a lesser degree because their losses were smaller and the result of Castro's triumph. But the desire was of revenge among the refugee groups here were thus covered up, and whenever somebody like Garrison in New Orleans would try to establish a connection between the assassination and the Bay of Pigs, he would be put down as a drunkard, incompetent, and silenced. Garrison was completely discredited and lost his district attorney's position. His latest book is a fiction dealing with the assassination. That is what I need to find. His latest book is a fiction dealing with the assassination. Garrison did write a fictional book about the assassination. And I think it was the last book that he wrote. I don't have it. I would like to get a copy of it. I don't even know what it's called. All right, and that's what we're going to call it for today. In the next chapter, we'll pick up, will be Willem Altman's and his clairvoyance. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you haven't picked up the book, pick up the book. If you haven't tuned into Bloody History World War II, it's on Substack. The link's in the description. Please do that. And so, if you'd like to make a donation or anything like that, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/JFKbook. I'm getting ready to start on my next book here, and I'm genuinely in need of a new Mac, even like a new mini Mac, to like $600 one. So if anybody wants to make a donation for me to pick up a new Mac to start on the next book, that would be fucking amazing. And yes, that would be such a big help, because I can't use a PC to put together my slides. End of story. It fucking sucks for that. So I need to get a new Mac. It's crucial for me to continue my work. So thanks, everybody, and we'll be back tomorrow.